Well, how about I just give a little introduction? I'll turn it over to you to say a little bit about as just a brief intro of why we're here and what we're doing.
Okay.
So I'm Brendan Nyhan. This is a webinar for the election research pre-acceptance competition, and the goal is to get your questions answered about the competition itself and the mechanics of pre-registration. So we collected some questions electronically, but you may not have had a chance, or others may occur to you now. So we really want this to be demand driven. We're going to try to keep our answers brief and let you guys steer us towards what's most useful to you. Okay, so I'll turn over to Skip, and maybe you can start to talk about some of the things that we're hearing most frequently as far as questions that people have.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today. This is a very exciting endeavor. As you know, there's a lot of interest in it, both inside political science and outside of it. There is growing interest in questions of replicability and reproducibility throughout academics, in industry, and things of that nature. And it's amazing how often political science, what we're doing in different ways, is being seen as an icon of what other people can do. So I was just at a conference the last 2 days about academia industry partnerships and the role of reproducibility, and several people brought up this, what we're talking about right now, as a model for what others can do. So everybody's part of that, and it's kind of up to us to make it work. In terms of the project itself, the main question that I get most of the time is about the relationship between a pre-registered design and things you might discover afterwards. So in the papers that you would write, our expectation is that you have a motivation and you have a research design, and then you have a results section. And the results section would have one part that goes through the analyses that you described in your pre-registered report that you registered on the Open Science, or part of the Open Science framework. But, as happens when you look at data, when you start to think about counterfactuals or different explanations, you may have new thoughts, and it's totally acceptable to have another part of the paper where you describe those thoughts. What we're looking for is truth in labeling. So instead of what we all suspect sometimes happens, which is, I'm trying to write a paper on whether tall people vote for Trump or not, and I run 96 regressions, and the first 96 don't show a relationship, but the 97th one does. So I show you that. And then I make a claim about it. But what you might like to know is that of the 97 specifications I could come up with, I only got that in one case. It doesn't invalidate the fact that I found it once. It just might change what you do with that information. And so that's what we're really about. It's kind of getting closer, trying to close the gap between what we discover and what we tell people. So I guess that's the question that I get most often. And then the second is more about when you submit a paper to a journal, like what does the paper look like? We're going to post the FAQ, right? So David Meller from the Center for Open Science has some nice links from other fields. But a way to think of it is it's just like a paper you would send to a top journal in political science, normally, but it's missing two things. So you have your title and your abstract and your motivation and your theory and whatnot, and you're laying out the design, and you're advocating for or explaining why a particular way of looking for something is a constructive way to make progress on a question. Then you'd have a table where your results are, and the difference is some of those tables are going to be blank because you won't have the data yet. And then your results section, you could even have a template you could even write part of the results section where you say, okay, we first did this thing describing the pre-registered design, and then you have a couple blank sentences there. So the biggest blank part would be if you have a second results section where you talk about, well, afterwards we did some exploratory stuff and here's what we did, and then a conclusion talking about what you learned. But, most of the paper could look like the ones we've all been submitting for years. So I think that's a way to think about it. We've been talking to the editors of the participating journals. They are willing to work with reviewers because many reviewers haven't seen a paper like this before. I've been in communication with a number of them, and there'll be a little bit of a learning curve here. But I can tell you that the editors didn't have to do this. It's a little bit of a pain for them, just to be blunt. But they want to move us away from some of the practices that have led to, really questioning how we know what we know. And, they want to be part of this. They want to help people with innovative ideas, push them forward. So The answer, Brendan said we'd be short. I'm going to be short now. Looks like a typical paper, missing a couple things in the table and maybe a section. So those are the two questions I've been asked the most, and I'll be quiet now for a while.
All right. Well, I can just jump in on a very closely related point, and then again we'll give you guys a chance if you want to unmute yourself or just type into the chat window if that's preferable. Questions you have, and we'll just keep it moving towards the stuff that you find most helpful. The question that I get most often besides those two that Skip highlighted are, can we use other data? Right? And so the question is yes. The answer is yes. There are no restrictions on how you use the data from the ANES in your article, as long as results from the ANES that are pre-registered appear in the main text of the article. Then you should look at the rules for the exact wording, but basically that will qualify you as a valid entry into the competition, allow you to go forward with the journals in this state where that you don't yet know the results. So you could have, for instance, other data that you'd like to confirm, right? So this gets at the point about exploratory versus confirmatory testing. The pre-registration movement is not to say that you should never do exploratory analysis and data discovery is not valid. But say you have some finding that was exploratory, now you can pre-register it and do a confirmatory analysis using the ANES data, and that could be study 2 or study 3, et cetera. That's not necessarily required, but it might be helpful, especially for those top journals that it might be hard to clear their publication bar with analysis of ANES data alone. Right? And of course, we can't speak for the journals, but that's just something that people have raised as a concern.
That would include, by the way, the necessary condition is data from the 2016 ANES. I study this in the field right now, but of course the ANES has been collecting data for 60 years. So, obviously papers could use all of that. It's just got to have 2016 in it as a key part of the analysis.
So we have more questions, but I don't want to preempt anyone who wants to jump in. All right. So if any of you just interrupt us at any time. Okay. I
got a quick question. This is Alex Georgia speaking right here.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi. By the way, Arthur, I sent you an email a little while back, and thanks so much for your responses about my questions. So my question pertains to the data itself. So if we want to get access to the individual responses of each of the respondents, I looked at the ANES website, and it looks like in general you need to apply for something that they're calling restricted data access. I'm wondering if for this ERPC, if we need to apply for the restricted data access to see all of the individual questions that everybody does.
So I'll take that. So the ANES, the main data set that it puts out, the unit of analysis is an individual response. So if you think about the data that they release as a matrix, the columns are let's say every individual that participates, and the rows are almost every question that's asked. So that's the main. So when you downloaded the actual data set, the unit of response, the unit of is an individual. Restricted data access pertains to a special set of questions. So one of the things that the ANES worries about is identifiability. Throughout the course of its survey, it has there may be 400 responses. And so there are ways that you might be able to, if you had certain types of data, you might be able to take those 400 responses and identify someone. So for example, one of the variables that is not released to the public is in the public data set is the detailed census code of their job, right? Because I might be the only 43-year-old female janitor in a certain county in Wyoming. County is one of the things that also isn't released. And if I'm the only one of those and you have access to that data, you could identify me and my political views. And so the ANES is very sensitive about that. So data like county, data like detailed work information, professional information, you can get that, but you have to go through the RDA process. The RDA process is an agreement between you, your university or institute, and the ANES, where you agree to use that you ask for specific data, variables, you talk about why you want them, and then you have a contractual commitment about how you will and will not use them. And so, but that's only for a relatively small set of data. So it's things like, I think there's a list of 7 variables. It's county, it's detailed profession. Sorry, I don't have that list in front of me, but I can send it to you if you want to. Yeah, but it's for RDA is only for those things. Everything else, like my political party, who I like, whether I turned out, did I watch TV, kind of all of this stuff, that's all individual level.
Oh, okay. So all that restricted data is just above and beyond, basically, the stuff that we're already going to be provided.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
The 2012 data or even the 2016 pilot will give you a good flavor for what the data will look like when you get it. And that'll be available to everyone when the data is released.
All right, thanks.
Cool. Thanks. That's a good question. Skip, do you want to, since we're talking about data, do you want to talk about the Facebook point that you were looking into, or are we not able to give a response on that at this point?
So we were at, I'm going to check my email. So the ANES has, I used to run the ANES, but I don't anymore. So we were asked a question about a new item on the questionnaire. It has to do with Facebook. So I think people are being asked for their maybe Facebook address. I do not know what they're going to do with that. I don't know what supplemental Facebook information may be available at this point. I have my email up, and if I get a response during the webinar, I'll give it to you. Otherwise, we'll post it on the website as soon as we get it. So I know I read the question. I know that it's on there. I don't know if they're going to like link it to other data or things of that nature.
Okay. So let's see. Have we? So, okay, maybe I can talk a little. So we're going to move into a preview of what the pre-registration process looks like for people who haven't done it or aren't familiar with it, but it might help to start being a little more specific about the mechanics of that, and to kind of hopefully get you thinking about how you would do it yourself. We're going to post a series of resources on the FAQ site for the competition that will direct you towards some examples, both of articles that have used this format, but also pre-registration plans themselves. But I think one of the things that's intimidating about this process to people who haven't done it is the expectation that of 100-page pre-analysis plans that specify every possible contingency. And it's important to be clear that we do have a minimum set of standards that are required for your entry to be a qualifying entry, but it's not the full-blown 10 researchers working for a year to produce a pre-analysis plan threshold that you have to clear, right? So how you're going to code the variables that you're going to use, what analyses you're going to run specifically, right? What exact hypotheses you're going to test. And until you write those things down, they're often less obvious than you think. I guess the number one experience that I've had myself in doing this, actually, I was just doing this last week, is thinking I really had my head around a study and then trying to write down everything we were going to do and discovering how many decisions we still had to make about exactly how we were going to do our pre-registration. So seeing the forms and things will hopefully be helpful, but I would definitely recommend checking out some of the pre-analysis plans that are out there. And again, they don't have to be hundreds and hundreds of pages long. If your design is relatively simple, your analysis plan can be relatively simple too.
Yeah, when we do the run through on the mechanics, it can be again, if you have these questions answered for Brendan, it can be relatively brief.
So we have more questions we've collected electronically. So of course, please jump in. Okay. Will we give feedback on the registration plans? I don't think we expect to, but that's definitely something that I would actually encourage you to seek feedback from your colleagues and co-authors and friends. So one of the norms that's developed in the research areas that use pre-registration more frequently is to move the feedback process forward from the review stage to the design phase. And that way you can avoid pre-committing yourself to mistakes you would have liked to avoid had you known you were going to make them. So I would definitely encourage people to workshop their designs and their article submissions just like you would for a completed study. Skip, do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I'll say, I'll say something maybe I shouldn't say, but when I used to run tests, timeshare experiments for the social sciences, and we had the review process was kind of earlier on. If you know about tests, you send in a proposal, and if it's accepted, we actually run your study for you. I encouraged people to do what Brendan said, and also to send things to me. I mean, I'm happy to. I can't tell you a journal's going to accept it, because that's ultimately up to the editors. But I'm happy to look at things, But I think Brendan's main point is creating this culture where, you're at the design stage, you're taking your own ideas, and you're instead of waiting till the conference when you've already run everything and it's specified, it's too late, and then you're up there and somebody says, well, why didn't you control or specify that? And you have this V8 moment. You're like, why? So pushing that forward is I think one of the things we want to have in this process. But if Tyson, you have lots of great colleagues, but if they're all busy on Thursday, I'll look at it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where working with folks who have experience with this also will be helpful, right? So if you haven't done this, but you have a colleague or friend who has, it's a great person to reach out to, or to Skip or myself, other people like that. And again, looking at models will help you think about what should be in there, right? Because the other thing is, until you do it, you often don't realize the things you should be thinking about, the kinds of concerns people are addressing. Like, if this happens, what will I do? If that happens, what will I do? And so forth. Let's see, what else? Let me say one other thing about that, if I can, Skip, which is sometimes it's important, and we wrote this into the FAQ, but I just want to underscore it for everyone. There's still useful, the most important function of pre-registration is to say, these are the hypotheses I'm testing, and this is what I'm looking for. But sometimes it can be actually helpful to say, here's something important I'm going to look at, and I don't have strong expectations about, but I'm registering that as an area of interest in advance. And again, what you're doing is you're alleviating that concern that there was ex post data dredging that took place over hundreds of possible moderators, right? And you might say, here are 2-3 moderators of interest. They're not things that I have strong expectations about, but I plan to examine them. And again, that's providing greater credibility for your readers down the road that this is something that you really intended to do in advance.
Like, nobody's asking you to be a futurist, right? We're just asking all of us to just be honest, like, about how we came to something, right? So pre-registration is a way to say, okay, I committed to this bunch of steps. Here's the analysis I had in mind at a certain point. We can all look back. In my case, I can look back 3 months at something I did. Like, what was I thinking then? But I want to be part of a culture where we can all learn from my mistakes.
So, Skip, we have 2 questions in the chat window there. Do you want to take one of those?
Sure. Yeah. I'll go in order. So Jennifer has asked, can you recommend easily accessible examples that are similar in style to what you think would be good examples of plans for us to learn from? So we are working up an FAQ with the help of the folks at the Center for Open Science. They have been doing pre-registration for a while. They've built a lot of the architecture, like most of the architecture that we're using. So we have a link in there to a large number of pre-registered design. So that's the good news. So we'll post that. We'll put that on the website. I can do that this afternoon, you can probably put it on the Facebook page earlier than that. But so that's the good news. The bad news is they come in all shapes and sizes. So there's not just one, which is reinforcing what Brendan said. Some of what it's going to look like depends on your interest and your design. So, basically there's an independent variable, there's some dependent variables, there's a set of relationships that you're assuming to be true, and there's a set of relationships about what you're inquiring. So you walk in with a partial conceptual framework, and part of what you're trying to do in design is evaluate the relative validity from an empirical perspective of extensions of that framework that you're coming in with. So, sorry that there won't be a cookie cutter, but there are a lot of great examples on there. And some of them, just if you look at the first one, it's like, this is like way too intense. Just go down the list because they're in all different shapes and sizes.
Right. So one thing that's challenging about this is we are trying to pioneer this format in political science when there aren't a ton of examples, especially that have done pre-acceptance. So The EGAP registry that we'll provide a link to is where most of the existing political science pre-registrations exist. So that's going to be the best resource for you to see what other people who do work like you, how they're using the format. That group, though, tends to be concentrated in folks who do development, so you may want to find those people whose research is most relevant to your own. So if you're an American politics scholar, for instance, find the American politics-related pre-registrations, which often look quite different than the people doing field experiments in Africa or Asia or things like that. So that's one idea. And then you may need to actually track those pre-registrations down to how they were finally published to see how that process looks. And there's you could either trace designs from EGAP to the published form that were not pre-accepted, or you could also look at the special issue of Comparative Political Studies that just came out, which actually did use this pre-acceptance format. And if any of those folks registered on EGAP and the designs are now public, you might be able to see that with a one-to-one match. Okay, thank you for the question, Jennifer. So if you want to say a little about the overall process, because you've had the most detailed conversations with the editors.
Okay, all right. So this question is from SM.
Steve Rogers, yeah.
Rogers? Is that like Captain America? That's pretty cool. So I'm sure you haven't heard that before. So the question is, could you walk us through, I'm a big fan by the way. So could you walk us through the big picture submission process with suggested dates for submission? In particular, I'm also unclear about how the review process works. So so that's the question. So the rest of it is the following correct? I'll just walk through the process. So first you and your team, you have an idea of what you want to do, and then you pre-register a study on the special website. You can go to the ERP website. You can find it through the Twitter or Facebook pages, and we'll link you right to the specially designed website for you to design a project for this for ERPC. It was designed in coordination, and most of all the interesting mechanics were done by the Center for Open Science, who we're very grateful to for their partnership in this. So you go to that website, you pre-register it. If you haven't been on the site yet, you don't just post like a paper. You're asked a series of questions about your design, about your hypotheses, about your variables, about your specifications. So it's a bunch of radio boxes. You can attach things as well, but it's like an interview. So if you haven't visited the site yet, a lot of the questions you might be saying, what do I include? Just look through the interview in effect, and you'll see what you need to answer. So some of that is laid out for you. Anyway, so you pre-register the study, and then you complete your pre-registration. And so now it's in a box. So then you take the article and you send it to one of the participating journals. There's 9 journals. You let them know there's a designation. I can't remember. We told you some words to put in the title. I don't remember what they are at the moment, but they're on the website. Do you remember, Brendan? What did we? Sorry, it's on the website. It's there. The secret that everyone knows. So you send it to the journal, and then they review it like they would a normal paper. I mean, physically the process is the same. The difference, of course, is there are some missing elements, the data and some of the analysis. So the journal, when they approach the reviewer, they say, we're reviewing this paper under conditions of pre-acceptance. It does not have data. It does not have this. This is why we're doing it. So please follow our journal standards, adjusted for the fact that it doesn't have the data and some of the analysis. So that's it's the typical thing that happens when you submit to a journal. What will happen next is the article is reviewed. It can be rejected. You can get a revise and resubmit. And as long as you stick with the original design, that's fine. If you get a revise and resubmit and you want to change that, you could pre-register a new one and have a chain. But I guess the biggest question is around this idea of conditional acceptance, right? So the journal won't accept it straight away. It's not like most of the time when you get a journal article accepted, there's a condition, they would fix this up, clean that up and whatever. Don't make massive changes before you send us the final version. So there's an analogy here. So the expectation is that you'll perform the analysis described in the pre-registration plan. You are also permitted and perhaps even expected to do some other analyses, and then you'll complete the paper. The expectation is if you do what you said you were going to do, then it's accepted. So that's the process. Did I miss anything, Brendan?
I don't think so. I mean, those steps after your conditional acceptance are where we're breaking new ground. So we're describing it to you as the model of registered reports intends it to happen. And we'll see how it plays out in practice. But the journals are making a commitment to you that if you submit a professionally produced manuscript that follows what you said you would do, then the presumption is that article will be published, right? And so hopefully at that, it doesn't mean it won't be reviewed, and they might say, well, you didn't explain this very clearly or whatever, but what we're trying to rule out is the kind of post hoc publication bias that creeps in where people say, well, your results were null and maybe it was this and maybe it was that, right? And that's we hope one of the benefits of this competition for you is that there's a lot of risk with any project that the results don't come out the way you want, and there's a process that demands significant results. And we, hope that the competition can create an institutional framework that reduces that pressure and allows you to write the article you wanted to write, right? And if your expectations weren't supported, that is fine, right? And we'll certainly assist you if there are any concerns about the interpretation of that. The ultimate decisions for any journal are, of course, up to that journal. But I think we feel like we have a good faith commitment from all of these editors that they are on board with this format and that they see the value in it. So hopefully that'll be a pretty smooth process at that point.
It's actually a little more than that, because these journal editors, like, they weren't randomly assigned to us. So they want to do this, and the risk they're taking is I'll just being blunt, is somewhat minimal. They've committed to like 2 articles. They can do, if they really want to do more, they can. So this is this is going to be new for them. They're going to be learning about it as well. But they're prepared to, if you have a really strong paper that makes that puts forward a compelling theoretical framework, and really, before you run the analysis there, you say, I really want to know how this works out. Like, something definite is at stake in which way this goes. And that's the case where if you get a null results, like, thank you so much. Now we know not to go down this path, right? Now we know that. So the journal editors are on board with that part, but they haven't done it before either. So we're all going to learn together.
If I can say one last thing, which is just that if you read the CPS special issue, there's an overview article by the editors, the guest editors of the special issue, where they talk about how that review process went. That might be instructive to you in framing your submissions. They said that the fear people had was that the format would create a focus on technical details, but instead what they found was that the format drove an attention to theory. What are the questions that are so important that we'd like to know the result, even if it were null, as Skip said? And so identifying those questions and saying why your findings are valuable, regardless of how they turn out, is going to be a key burden of proof for you, because these editors are committing journal space in advance, right? So they're committing to publishing what are, by general scientific standards, very long articles. They could just say, nothing I expected came out the way that I expected it to. So you don't want, in other words, or at least a burden of proof may be higher for a paper that is only considered to be of interest if you find your expected result, right? So make sure that both sides of the null hypothesis framework are sufficiently motivated. So once we have, Sarah, should we switch over to the OSF preview, Skip, or David Miller once he gets here, or Sarah?
Yeah, sure. David is actually
corner there.
Yeah, David is actually here, I believe.
So we're going to start previewing the format.
Before we switch over, can I? There was another part of Steve's question.
Oh yes.
Yeah, just about the suggested submission date. So the question is, like, what is the suggested submission date for the article? And I think Brendan just commented, because I'm not sure we're converged on this. I don't know that there is one. The key date is that on the day that the ANES releases its data, we're not going to accept any more pre-registered designs. So any article that is eligible for this competition has to be based on a design that is fully registered by the date that ANES puts in the data. So so that's the main time thing. In terms of optimal timing, I think the only other factor is right now we have a limited number of awards, right? We have like 20 awards. So, if you were to wait, each journal has an initial endowment of two awards. So, if you were the third one getting to APSR or something like that, then, if they were willing to publish it, that's great. We might be out of money. So I think that's the timing thing. I'm not sure, but, it would be in terms of like demonstrating the value of this project. Like I'd like it better if we had a lot of submissions, sort of in the next 6 months, so that it'd be timely and things of that nature. But this is new for everybody, and maybe we don't get that. So maybe, we're a year from now and people are still submitting articles based on designs that they did in April. And, if that's where we are, then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is that one other unique feature of this competition is the opportunity for a journal roll down process that's more efficient than what traditionally happens to you. You could submit to the APSR and be rolled down to another participating journal quite efficiently. Right? So another incentive to submit quickly is to get into that process, which we hope will move articles towards publication in a more timely way than the normal journal process, which, as we all know, can take years.
Yeah. I think just on behalf of some of the other journals, I think they prefer referring to it as a horizontal roll.
A lateral movement, yeah. Exactly. Pardon me. We love them all.
Yes, equally.
All right. Should we turn it over to David? So this is David Miller from the Center for Open Science.
Yay.
And he's going to give us a brief walkthrough of the pre-registration process. And again, I guess, David, if I can speak for you, right? Interruptions are welcome if people have questions along the way.
Yeah, please do. Can you guys hear me? Just confirm.
Yeah, and just to put this in the context, like David is our Captain America. So, just for this project. So, yeah.
All right, can you guys see the, it should be the ERP, the Election Research Pre-Acceptance Competition website. You guys can see that? Okay. So to start the pre-registration process, just, find anything you want on the website, but then select register design. And that takes you into the Open Science Framework. You do need an account on the Open Science Framework, and if you don't have one, it'll prompt you to make one there. But otherwise, it'll load up your screen and give you a couple of different options. For most first-time users, the only option you're going to have is start a new pre-registered analysis plan, because the site will just check to see if you have any projects in a draft state right now. But also here, when the first page on the OSF, there's a couple of information links that once you log on, once you have an OSF account, you will get access to the actual questionnaires. And I believe everyone has seen that, but links to those are right here. So I'm going to start a new project. I'm just going to run quickly through it. A couple of the fine print is here. If you have any questions, let us know. But this is very straightforward. This will just take a second because I'm just going to get dummy answers to show what you have. But simply, start answering the questions that are filled out here. If you have co-authors on the paper that you want to add, you can do that. I'm going to add Sarah as my co-author here. And then start simply looking through the various parts of the research form. Research questions and hypotheses are very straightforward. Obviously, everybody's going to be working from a common data set, but as if you look through those, you can see that there's obviously a large potential number of variables that you can use. So here's a spot where you can start to specify exactly which questions or variables you're going to be looking through in that data set. If you're going to be using data from previously released ANES data sets, that's perfectly acceptable. Specify what variables will be there. But as Skip said, most of your analysis does have to be contingent upon the data that has yet to be released, because obviously that's not going to bias the results that you're going to be conducting in your analyses and your confirmatory hypothesis tests. So specify that there. And obviously an index is some sort of combination of variables that you're likely to need here. So independent variable, ID, DVs, etc. Mean of X, Y, Z, or whatever. And most of the time when creating a pre-registration is going to be on the specific analysis plan. So this needs to be a fully specified model. So whatever you're going to use, whatever comparisons, differences between populations or correlations or regressions or whatever specific moderating variable you think refers back to your specific hypothesis test, specify that here. And this first one in the analysis plan is where the bulk of that pre-specified analysis should be. So ANOVA regression or whatever. Ideally, there's going to be, for clarity, one specific hypothesis test or one specific model per hypothesis that you specified on the first page. So that's just an easy way to keep a one-to-one correlation between hypotheses and stats tests. Let's see, transformation. If you're going to look for any normalization, you can specify how that's going to go here. Follow-up analysis is simply to encourage you to remember that interactions or moderating variables are often the focus of a lot of these statistical tests. And so, for example, if your ANOVA comes back significant, how are you going to do any pairwise comparisons or whatever? Most are going to be using traditional statistical tests. So specify if your p-value is less than 0.05, specify if you are, if that's the cutoff you're going to use, any corrections, Bonferroni or other types of corrections that might be required for multiple testing. If you're making inferences based on effect sizes or based on Bayes factors or whatever, here's a space to specify how you're going to make those decisions, p-value or whatever. Is there any way that you're going to determine ahead of time how you're going to exclude data? So one of those ways that Skip and Brennan mentioned earlier on that's easy to hack your way through a data set is to convince yourself after the fact that you're looking through the data that, oh, I should really be excluding people who have these types of weird responses. And after you see the data set, that starts to mix up the difference between confirmatory test and creating your hypothesis, your data exploration. So specify ahead of time what will be excluded. Missing data, so of all the respondents, if sometimes not all responses will be filled out. I don't know if ANES has any sort of quality control check or if they go back, but maybe Skip will be able to answer that question. But if not, will you somehow fill in the lack of responses, or what will you do to deal with missing data? This last set is completely optional, but an exploratory analysis is simply a place to describe what other tests you might run. Especially if you don't have a strong theoretical framework for making a specific prediction, often people will say in a section like this, I'm going to look at a lot of the demographic data, but I don't have a strong a priori reason for thinking that richer people will have this different behavior than poorer people or something. So you feel free to put in any information there. You don't have to report everything from your exploratory analysis section. It's just a sort of an outlet to describe what other paths you might want to go down. Most importantly, you do have to report the results of course, every confirmatory hypothesis test. And you are encouraged to do that data exploration and that exploratory analysis, but as Skip mentioned, in the final paper that gets published, those results that weren't specified ahead of time have to be separate and distinct. I think I filled out everything. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to create this pre-registration, and I've got 48 hours to withdraw it without leaving a trail of it. So that's what I'm going to end up doing. So you'll see what that URL looks like when you get it. But this preview screen just gives you a place to look at your answers. I will register it. You've got options to make it publicly available to anybody who has Google, will be able to find it, or enter it into an embargo date of up to 4 years. These embargoes can be ended early, but otherwise they will end at the date you specify here. So they'll be private, and you'll be able to share them with people through a view-only link. So maybe you want to include that in your submission, and I'll show you how to do that. Registering my project. So in the background, the OSF is creating a persistent copy of this project. And it's a little bit boring to watch right now, so please stand by.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
There we go. Let's see here. So right now it's in the process of registering. So what's happening is that you'll get an email with a link to your registration. And what that will look like, it's going to be a little bit different than this link right here, but this is the short persistent URL that you're going to be including in your submission. So when you write up your submission, you'll have the title, abstract, introduction, and methods. And somewhere in that submission to a journal, you should include that. Here we go. Here we are. So now, okay, so it's giving me this option to cancel right now. This will go away after 48 hours, but until then, that'll stay right there, or if I confirm it. Right now, this is the short persistent URL that's going to get people back to this read-only version of my project. And you can see right there, there's the link to the research plan that I just filled out with all the information. All right, and so right now, if anybody else were to go to this, they would not be able to access it because it's private right there. But if I wanted to send this out to editors or to reviewers to share it, I'm just going to create this view-only link right here. I'm just going to call it for peer review. And now I've got this link here that anybody will be able to access. So it's a little bit of a longer link, but it gets you to that global unique identifier number that will be able to be shared widely. And at any time, you are able to revoke that link. So I could remove it once I wanted to. All right, for now, I'm going to stop talking and look for any questions that have popped up. Let's see here. I'll stop screen sharing right now.
Thank you. That's really, I mean, they designed, can you guys hear me? Yeah, I mean, Center for Open Science, designed this system where the interface is, you can see it's pretty simple, guide you through the things you need to know. So we're so grateful for that. It's really, they built it. So yeah, we'll take questions. Either you can state them or throw them in the chat. We have one now. All right, so David, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so that that will give the that blinded view-only link will give the editors and reviewers access to that registered analysis plan. So it should be included in the manuscript. There's one question about blinding. You can make it anonymous, that my name and Sarah's name would not show up. Feel free to use that if you want to. If you think the journal, Skip, do you know if any of the journals use anonymous or blind peer review process?
I think they're all double blind.
They're all double blind.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let me go ahead and show just one more time, and then you'll be able to compare these links. Blind peer review link. I'm calling it that. And if everybody, where did I put it? Right here. We're to go to the second link that I'm putting out right now. Let's see there. If you go to those two links I just put out in the chat, but hopefully you go to that second one. Yep, our names are not included in that. Yep, good.
I'm checking. I said that I think they're all double blind. Does political analysis do single blind? I was just looking at their website. I can't remember, but I may have misspoken. But at least 8 of them are double blind. And I'm not sure about the 9th.
Okay. And maybe it's just safer to do double blind whenever you're doing, just do it blinded for anybody, because the editors obviously look through your submission, your manuscript, and will remove identifying information from that. They might not think one way or the other to look through that link provided in your manuscript. So go ahead and default to that anonymous view-only link.
Political analysis is double blind, so they all are.
Yeah. Question here.
There's a question from Colin. Do you have to be a registered OSF user to see the blinded design? No, you do not. I'll share my screen one more time here. Google Chrome. Okay, I'm going to open up so now I'm not logged into the OSF. So when the peer reviewer or the editor goes to that link, even though they're not signed in, even though they'll ask them to be an OSF user, but you do not have to be an OSF user to follow that link.
Any other questions? So I know this can be very abstract until you actually try to do it. So I guess the other thing is, of course, just to say to everybody, if you hit a hurdle at whatever point, to email Skip or myself or David and just let us know, right? So once you start doing it, I think more questions will become apparent. But we're thrilled about your interest. We really hope all of you will apply, tell your friends and co-authors. We want to make this work for you. So just tell us how we can do that.
Yeah, and David gave us this list of, so we'll post it. We can post it on the Facebook and maybe on the Twitter, the link to the examples. And then I'm traveling, but I'll put it on the ERPC website tonight.
Okay. All right. Well, it seems like that is the group is ready to part. We're in under an hour, so that's pretty good by webinar standards. Thanks to the Center for Open Science, folks. Thanks to everybody for joining us. And we hope to see your entry soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks.